Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to episode 5 of The Bronco Well, refilling your bucket so you can pour into others. I'm your podcast host, Molly Veldier. I'm an occupational therapy capstone student from Western Michigan University. I came to create this podcast as part of my capstone experience for my OT program because I love working with pediatric caregivers and their families and think that caregivers could use a little bit extra support in this crazy world that we live in. I'm completing this capstone under the guidance of Dr. Michelle Suarez, Associate Professor of Occupational Therapy and the Resiliency Center Director at Unified Clinics, located on Western Michigan University's Kalamazoo campus. Welcome back to episode 5, everyone. Today's episode is titled Caregiver Care Taking Action. Let's go over some of what we talked about in episode 4 to kind of jog our memory as we spring forward into some new content. So in episode 4, we discussed the power of naming emotions and how it's the first important step to navigating your emotional landscape and then therefore regulating your emotions. We discuss research supporting this and that it's linked also in the show notes of the previous episode. We also made note of the fact that our feelings are not always the result of choices that we make. Rather, our feelings live in that limbic system, which is a primitive part of our brain that is always vigilant and looking to keep us safe. So whenever we feel a certain way, that's not always the result of choice. It's not always rational. We also engaged in a guided reflection, prompting you to meditate and mull over your emotions and how they feel within your body. We kind of use that as a springboard or launch pad to the term interoception, which we're going to dive into more in today's episode. Here's our agenda for today's episode. We're going to talk about interoception and our other hidden senses and learning how to actually take action, what to do when you feel these certain emotions in your body. So let's get started. What are the hidden senses? You've heard me talk about this a little last episode, but we're going to dive so much more deeper into this topic today. So we've got hidden senses within our body. You all know the 5 main senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell. But there's also 3 other hidden senses: proprioception, interoception, and the vestibular sense. So what are these? Proprioception is your body knowing where it's at in relation to the space around it. So for example, when you're seated in a chair, your body knows where your legs and your hips are at in relation to space because your hips are receiving that deep pressure. You can think of it related to touch, but it's more deep than that. It's about knowing where your bones, where your muscles are, all in relation to the world around you. Body awareness, in a sense. The interoceptive sense that I touched on last episode is knowing and understanding your body's internal cues, being able to pick up on what's going on inside your body. An example of that would be understanding when your body's hungry, thirsty, needing to go to the bathroom, and just being able to tune into what's going on internally. This also relates to where feelings live in your body as well. For example, I know that when I get really anxious, my hands start to sweat significantly. So I can kind of usually tune into my emotional state when my hands are starting to sweat and might even get shaky. The 3rd hidden sense is the vestibular sense, knowing where your head is at in relation to gravity. You might understand this better in the context of a roller coaster. When you're doing those big old loop-de-loops and your head is upside down, you can kind of feel when all that blood is rushing to your head, right? The vestibular sense is really linked to our inner ear and those crystals inside and other various anatomical structures within the inner ear. But we'll keep it more simple, and it's just overall knowing where your head is at in relation to gravity. All 3 of these hidden senses are tied to regulation. But interoception, which was that second one that I talked about, helps us to unravel what our body needs and how to actually regulate ourselves. When we can label our feelings and then understand how they feel physically within our body, we then have the power to combat against these feelings dominating and ruling over us. Let's tie in an example. Say, for instance, that you had a very hard time getting your child to go to bed. They were super dysregulated, didn't want to go to bed, lots of resisting, but you finally managed it and you're just feeling pretty negatively about how the whole routine went. Resist the urge to disassociate or doom scroll or whatever sort of coping strategy might currently exist within your routine that helps your brain go offline. Instead, first, take inventory of your feelings, label them. Instead of just saying, well, that felt like crap, why did it feel like crap? Are you feeling frustrated? Are you feeling angry, anxious? Really reflect on what you're feeling. Pay attention to your body's cues. Where are these feelings existing within your body? Maybe you've identified frustration. You're feeling just so frustrated that your child just refused to go to bed, refused to participate in the routine. Maybe you feel that frustration in your chest. Maybe it's a really tight feeling. Or maybe you feel it in your stomach and it's all raveled in knots. Maybe you have a big headache. Maybe you just feel so tight within your own skin. Tuning into your body's internal cues can help you recognize negative feelings early and allow you to implement regulation strategies before that prefrontal cortex goes offline and that primitive limbic system takes over entirely. So why is this important? Let's put the interoceptive sense under a microscope. When the brain perceives a threat, the limbic brain takes over, that limbic system, the am I safe, am I not, vigilant system. Within that limbic brain is the amygdala. Remember, that's that fear center of the brain, calling back to some of our earlier episodes. And the job of that fear center is to keep you alive. The amygdala doesn't distinguish threat severity, just that there is a threat present. Dealing with a screaming child before bedtime versus being chased by a bear kind of measures up to being the same thing in the amygdala, which sounds crazy. A strong prefrontal cortex, though, is able to quickly regain control, offers perspective, and a logical response. It's able to pull that part of the brain back online, the core of who we are. A weakened prefrontal cortex, due to repeated past traumas or alerts, can't regain control as quickly or as easily. So when our brains perceive a threat these days, typically it's not the result of us being chased by a bear, but rather uncomfortable interactions with other people resulting in physiological changes such as increased heart rate or any other stress system activation. Because that amygdala cannot distinguish the level of severity of the perceived threat, it's important to be familiar with your body's cues to access that logical part of our brain, that prefrontal cortex, more easily and quickly. So what can a threat feel like in your body? We've talked a lot about the different types of stress responses and reactions that can occur within the body, and some of the sensations that can either kick off that reaction or be a result. Heart rate and breathing are very closely linked with that sympathetic nervous system response. Remember, that sympathetic nervous system response is that survival response. Think practically about it. Your heart rate increases to get blood diffused to your body, primarily your muscles, getting you ready for action, ready to run from the bear chasing you. Same thing with breathing. Increased breathing rates equate to oxygen to your body and your muscles, including your heart and your brain, also priming you for action. So when we consider what a threat might look like in our body, it's important to tune into those two specific things, heart rate and breathing. Stress responses or stress reactions may look different for everybody, but those two are usually pretty good guiding beacons. So how can we use our hidden senses to regulate, to bring us out of those stress responses? When we tune into that interoceptive sense to take inventory of our body's needs, we can harness our other senses to assist us in achieving regulation through sensory strategies. It's important to note that everybody is wired differently. What is regulating for one person may not be for another, especially if you're a neurodiverse caregiver. The following sensory strategies are generally regulating for most populations, including neurodiverse populations, but this is just a starting point. Find what works best for you and your family. Additional note, using sensory strategies to promote regulation is a pediatric occupational therapist's bread and butter. The concept of sensory integration, which is making sense of the world around us through our common and hidden senses, is a vastly complicated topic and is continually evolving too. What's provided in this podcast is a very basic overview of sensory strategies tailored to align with the caregiving and occupational therapy perspective. As of this date, this is what current literature delineates as sensory-based regulation strategies. The best tag team for sensory-based strategies is our proprioceptive and vestibular senses and input. You may be familiar with some of these terms or strategies in the context of your child, but they can also work to help regulate you as an adult as well. Remember that proprioceptive sense is knowing where your body is at in relationship to space, and your vestibular sense is understanding where your head is at in relation to gravity. So current neuroscience, which is the study of the brain, shows that proprioceptive input is very regulating to our nervous system, triggering that parasympathetic response, that peace response. So proprioceptive input, remember, that's that deep pressure telling our body where it's at in space. It can't just be light touch, which can actually be dysregulating. It needs to be that deep pressure. For kids, this might look like getting hugs or squeezes, which can certainly work. However, a more practical application of this for adults is actually exercise. Running, for example. When you run, each time your foot pounds the pavement, it provides that deep pressure to your joints and to your muscles. That, combined with a predictable, rhythmic pace, is very regulating. Walking too, for the same reasons if you're not a runner. This proprioceptive regulation link goes back to us being babies, safe and cared for with a typically developing nervous system. Imagine being swaddled and being held. Both of those things provide very deep pressure. When you're exposed to that at birth, proprioceptive input can certainly be very, very regulating. If you're able to combine proprioceptive input, that deep pressure, with vestibular stimulation, they become an unstoppable duo. Neuroscience shows us that linear, predictable patterns are regulating for our nervous system. Again, think about when you were a baby or when your child was a baby. Think about being gently rocked back and forth. That rhythmic, predictable pace tells your body that I'm safe and I'm cared for and I don't need to be in this stress response state. This also relates back to the exercise piece of it. Rhythmic pace when running is a predictable bilateral movement. It affects both sides of your body in the same way. For kids, regulating vestibular input might look like swinging or being held and rocked. For adults, it's not always so simple or so easy. You can absolutely try swinging or sitting in a rocking chair or also doing other forms of exercise that will give you vestibular input, such as running and walking, of course, but also yoga and dancing. If exercise isn't necessarily feasible for you right now, just with all the other 5 million things you have going on, progressive muscle relaxation is a great alternative. Squeezing everything super, super tight and then relaxing the muscles section by section in the body is a great way to provide that proprioceptive input. Even though you're not getting deep pressure from an external force, such as the ground or a hug or a squeeze, you are connecting with your body in a way that lets your muscles know where they're at by activating each and every one of them and then deactivating each and every one of them. Yoga or stretching, even just for 5 minutes each day in the morning and before bed, can also be really regulating, especially when setting the stage for a good night's sleep or starting the day. As I said before, just sitting in a rocking chair or even a rolling chair to do some mindfulness while you engage in some of those regulating movement patterns, that linear, calm, back and forth. Find what's right for you. Now, side note here, some of our neurodiverse children, or maybe even us as adults, might find that vestibular patterns such as spinning or wild movements are more regulating to them. And that might absolutely be the case. But I would just want to warn or caution that these spinning patterns can also be very alerting to our nervous system, promoting that stress response. Our bodies may find comfort in that stress response because that's where we live 99% of our lives. So I would caution against spinning or patterns such as that, because that actually is very alerting to the body and doesn't necessarily set the stage for that prefrontal cortex to come back online. But again, as I've been saying, everybody's different, and what works for one might not necessarily work for the other. Find what's right for you. All right, so now we'll introduce a new topic, breath work and the polyvagal theory. Now, if you've never heard of the polyvagal theory before, don't worry. I'm going to take you through it. So it's a highly complex theory, and I'll be sure to link resources for you in the show notes, but I'm also going to summarize a lot of the complex processes here for you. According to the Polyvagal Institute, in simple terms, polyvagal theory helps us understand how our body and brain work together to respond to stressors that are a part of everyday life, as well as experiences that are more significant, such as trauma. According to the theory, our nervous system has three main response states or branches. The first is the fight or flight response, which is activated when we're in a dangerous or threatening situation. Termed mobilization in polyvagal theory, this is our body's way of preparing to either fight the threat or run away from it. That second response state is the collapse response, which is activated when we feel overwhelmed or powerless. In this state, our body shuts down and we may feel numb or disconnected from our surroundings. In polyvagal theory, this is called the immobilization state. The third response state is the social engagement response, termed the ventral vagal response in the theory. This is activated when we feel safe and connected to others. This is when we are relaxed and open to social interaction, and is communicated in our eyes, facial expressions, and tone of voice. These three states are not entirely separate, but rather a continuum which we move through on a daily basis. Although the three states are controlled by different parts of our nervous system, they are all directly managed by the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is a large nerve that goes from the base of the brain to the gut, connecting the brain to the body. The vagus nerve plays a key role in regulating our heart rate, breathing, and digestion, as well as our emotional state. Polyvagal theory suggests that by understanding the fluctuation of these different response states, we can better manage our own health and wellness and better understand the behavior of others. That was a lot of content. So I'm going to build in some time here to reflect on what we just talked about. In summary, polyvagal theory has three branches. The mobilization branch, which is that fight or flight, the immobilization branch, which is a freeze response, and the ventral vagal response, which is when we're doing an A-OK and feeling peaceable and relaxed and ready to connect with others. So take some time, reflect on mobilization, immobilization, and ventral vagal. Welcome back. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information just thrown at you. Hopefully with some time to digest it, maybe even going back and listening to it again, we've got a better understanding. But we're going to plug ahead, and please understand that this is not something to memorize. It's not something that you need to worry about popping up on a quiz. Because what we're going to take is this really wonderful and beautiful definition of polyvagal theory from the Polyvagal Institute, and we're going to condense it down to be more applicable to your daily life. So how can you apply this theory This mobilization, immobilization, ventral vagal, what nonsense connected with the vagus nerve, what's going on? We'll get through it. So, how can you apply this in your life? Recognizing your physiological response to stress. That's that interoception piece. What's happening inside your body when you personally are beginning to feel the effects of stress? Maybe you're feeling more of that mobilization piece and that threat, or maybe you are simply feeling that immobilization piece where you're just kind of going numb. Regardless of your state of your response to the threat, take inventory, because I hope these strategies will help get you back to that ventral vagal or that parasympathetic response state. Many methods for self-regulation are based on activation of the vagus nerve, which is why the theory is called polyvagal theory. That activation of the vagus nerve can be stimulated by slow diaphragmatic breathing, gentle touch, and engaging in activities that promote relaxation, such as yoga or meditation and reflection. So if we are trying to use polyvagal theory to guide strategies in the moment of stress, doing breath work is a great way to get that prefrontal cortex back online and to re-enter that ventral vagal relaxed state. Focus on long exhales, making them even longer than your inhales. If you're breathing in for 3, breathe out for 5. Or if you prefer a strategy like box breathing, which is where you breathe in for a count, hold for a count, exhale for a count, and then hold for a count. Again, focus on emphasizing the exhaling, that slow diaphragmatic breathing. The exhale sends that signal through the vagus nerve that we are in a safe environment and that our body doesn't need to go into those stress responses. Again, let's think about it practically. If we are taking huge inhales of air and really breathing in hard, that's sending the signal to our body that we need to get as much oxygen into our body as possible to wake up the brain and the muscles and perhaps even be primed to fight or flee. But if we are emphasizing the exhales and taking long breaths out, that's sending a signal saying, I don't need to stock up on all of this extra oxygen in order to be ready to move and to mobilize. I can kind of just chill out here. It's a complicated concept, but if we break it down into rational pieces, it makes it a little bit more digestible. Again, polyvagal theory is just a theory, but there's so much evidence to support it. And all of that evidence will, of course, be linked within the show notes. Phew, we made it through. There was a lot of in-depth, complex topics today. We discussed a lot about the concept of our hidden senses, especially interoception and learning your body's cues. We discussed proprioception and vestibular senses and how we can harness them to help us regulate and therefore help us co-regulate our children. And we also discussed some more practical applications of sensory-based regulation and how you can try to implement that within your routine. And of course, we talked about polyvagal theory and how this can be applied to your everyday self-regulation techniques. There's a reason this episode is titled Taking Action. We discuss so many things that you can do and implement within your daily routine. But again, as I will continually emphasize, Rome was not built within a day. Don't feel like you have to include every sensory-based strategy or every breathwork strategy that we discussed today, because there's a lot of content. Focus maybe on one specific area, such as, I have that really nice rocking chair, and I just haven't had a moment's peace really since ever. So maybe I'll try to engage in some mindfulness while sitting in that chair and engaging in some of those linear rocking patterns. Pick just one area, try it out, try it on. And if it doesn't work for you or your family, throw it back right into the Bronco well and fish out a new strategy to help fill your bucket. As always, we are going to wrap up today's episode with some positive affirmations. So get in a headspace where you are ready to reflect and receive these affirmations and really try to absorb them and take it in. I am deserving of self-compassion and care. My well-being is essential to being an effective caregiver. Each breath can anchor me in the present moment. I honor my emotions and allow them to guide me. I release what I cannot control and focus on what I can. I find beauty in resilience. I am an advocate for those within my care and myself. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 5, Caregiver Care, Taking Action. Next episode, we are going to start discussing the dimensions of wellness and providing strategies with how you can fill your bucket in all of these areas. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.